So if you've been around here for a minute, you know that my content is all about teaching homebuyers how to navigate the home buying process without having to hire a costly buyer's agent. And part of why I recommend that homebuyers learn how to do this is because they stand to save significant money, right? Like if a buyer's agent on average gets paid 2.5 to 3% commission on the total sales price of the house, like if you don't have a buyer's agent, stands to reason that you've got an extra 2.5 to 3% now that you can leverage for your own benefit as a home buyer. So on a $700,000 house, that's like $21,000 that you now have to leverage. Well, I create this content and believe it or not, it ruffles some of the feathers of the long-standing agents. Now, a lot of these agents don't realize that I am a licensed agent, that I know my way around real estate transactions, but they like to call me names, call me an idiot, say, Nick, you have no understanding of how this works. And one of the biggest complaints or areas of pushback that I get from agents is they say a self-representing or a DIY home buyer cannot save any money because they cannot receive a commission, and the commission is set in the listing agreement. This is true sometimes, kind of, sort of. It's convoluted, it's kind of confusing, and that's actually why I wanted to create a video to help break this down. So let's use a real example. There's this agent out of Florida, really nice beach town in Florida. He represents like on average $3 million homes. And he is telling me, all right, when I get a listing, I sign an agreement with the seller for, let's just use an example, 6%. And in that agreement, I say that if there's a buyer's agent, I will share my commission. I will share a portion of my 6%, let's say half. I'll give 3% of my commission to the buyer's agent. But if there is no buyer's agent, then I just keep the full 6%. Now, in most cases, as I've talked with this guy, there usually is a buyer's agent. So he's anticipating that in most cases, he's going to be splitting his commission. But the point is that, hey, if an self-represented DIY home buyer shows up at my listing and they say, all right, I want 3% credit because I don't have an agent, contractually, legally, he is not obligated and the seller is not obligated to give that to the home buyer because contractually the listing agent is entitled to the full 6% when working with an unrepresented buyer. Now, hopefully there's some like alarm bells that are going off where it's just like, that sounds really lame. Like, well, doesn't it again stand to reason that if you as a consumer are foregoing a service, there should be an opportunity for you to benefit from that financially? And this whole arrangement where the listing agent shares their commission with a buyer's agent, if there is one, this is called cooperative compensation or a co-broker relationship compensation arrangement. And this was originally going to be part of the lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. With the settlement, they really didn't address the co-broker cooperative compensation agreement. But this is something that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has made it very clear that they do not like cooperative compensation. They believe that it is anti-competitive, that it creates too many opportunities for collusion and it keeps commissions artificially high. So just know that, like, in the eyes of the Department of Justice, they are seriously frowning upon and may, I think, very likely will act to outlaw the cooperative compensation agreements, arrangements in whole. And I think that that'll be a really good thing. And here's the thing, smart brokerages and smart realtors are already moving away from these cooperative compensation arrangements. But obviously that's not all brokers and all agents. So what do you do as a DIY home buyer If the seller and the listing agent that you're working with have one of these cooperative compensation agreements where if you are a self-represented buyer, the listing agent then just gets to keep the full 6% commission and they don't need to split it with anybody and they don't need to give you any sort of a discount. How do you still leverage that to your benefit? Can you leverage that to your benefit? Because what the agents in my comments say is that, nope, there's no benefit for the unrepresented, self-represented buyer, so they might as well get a buyer's agent, which frankly, like that's pretty damn self-serving, right? Like the whole idea that, you might as well have one because essentially it's free to you and there's no benefit to you for not having one. You can see why the DOJ is like, yeah, that's anti-competitive. Yeah. Anyhow, we'll dive into that deeper another time. I don't want to get too derailed here, but let's think about this. So you are coming into this $3 million home. It's beautiful. You are a doctor. A lot of the people that I work with are doctors because doctors are incredibly intelligent, incredibly competent, self-sufficient generally, and they don't like having to work with an agent who has like a tenth of the intelligence of them, and they feel like often this buyer's agent just gets in the way of what it is that they're trying to do and creates inefficiencies. So you're a doctor, you come in, you love this house, you want to represent yourself, and ideally you'd like to benefit from the fact that there's no buyer's agent that's part of this deal. Well, there's a few different things that you can do. You have to recognize that by removing the buyer's agent, there is now this 3% or so that is it's got to be absorbed somewhere. And your job to negotiate effectively is to figure out, okay, where is that money being absorbed? Now, the most obvious way is that it's being absorbed by the listing agent. Instead of making just 3% because they're having to split the commission, they're getting the full 6%. Well, as a home buyer, especially if this is a competitive market and there's multiple offers on the home, you got to recognize that your offer is now 3% more attractive to the listing agent, right? Like now they financially benefit by you purchasing the home because they're going to make twice as much. Now, do you think that that might have some bearing on what they recommend to their client, the seller, in terms of what they should accept for an offer? You better believe it will, right? Like that's just human nature. Of course, they're going to say, wow, this is an attractive offer. This looks really good because they stand to make a lot more. Now, there are some big hearted agents as well. And so they say, wow, I wasn't expecting to get all 6% on this. What I could do is I could actually just take 4% for myself, still 1% better than I was planning on. And I could give an extra 2% to the seller as a credit sign of goodwill. Well, still from the buyer's perspective, this has just made your offer 2% more attractive to the seller, 1% more attractive to the agent, and you're not having to spend any extra money to make your offer significantly more competitive than a very similar offer where there is a buyer's agent that needs to be compensated. Right. So in a competitive market, not having an agent still makes your offer 3% more attractive. And you just have to figure out who it makes the offer more attractive to so that you can leverage that in your negotiations. Now, the other thing to remember is that in real estate, all things are negotiable always. So just because the listing agent has a listing agreement with the seller that outlines compensation, that is not like a set in stone, can never change kind of agreement. It can always be amended. Now, both parties have to agree to it, but you got to realize that, again, the listing agent was kind of anticipating, in all likelihood, they were going to be splitting their commission, only seeing half of it or so anyway, because they were probably figuring there would be a buyer's agent. And the seller, all they care about is how much money they're netting at the end of the day. Like, is the deal going to close and how much money am I walking away with at the closing table? It's really the only consideration for the seller. With those things in mind, if it is not a competitive market, you absolutely can be a stick in the mud and kind of put the screws to the listing agent and just say, hey, I recognize that I am making you a whether full price or a very strong offer here, but I am seeking a 3% credit or concession because I do not have an agent. I am going to be representing myself. And you can back that up with it. If you're watching this video, clearly you're an educated home buyer. You care about this process. If you subscribe to my channel, if you're part of the school group and have gone through the course on all of the fundamentals of the home buying process, like, you're rock solid. And you can let the seller know that. And you can say, because I'm not creating really any extra work for the agent, I would like a 3% credit since you're not having to pay a buyer's agent. And the seller and the listing agent, then they've got to have an uncomfortable conversation. But in all likelihood, they will amend the listing agreement so that the listing agent gets paid 3% instead of the full 6%. Because again, that's what the listing agent was more than likely anticipating they were going to be getting anyway. It makes no difference to the seller because they're netting the same amount of money, and everybody wants to get the deal done. So the agent would be a fool, right? In a non-competitive market, they would be a fool to tank the deal because they are holding tight. It would just be greedy for them to just hold tight to, yeah, I am going to take that full 6%, damn it. That's not a good agent. Now, are there some agents like that out there? Probably. And if you're working with one of those people as a seller, man, you should fire them quickly. But all to say that even in these cooperative compensation arrangements, there are still benefits to you as a self-represented DIY home buyer. You've got to be a little bit more creative, but you can still negotiate that percentage that would otherwise be paid to a buyer's agent, leveraging that for your benefit to either make your offer more competitive or to get yourself a significant credit or concession coming back your way by not having an agent. So hopefully that clears up a very convoluted process, clear as mud, right? And more than anything, hopefully these cooperative arrangements go away, whether that's because the DOJ rules on them or it's because consumers just refuse to sign listing agreements that have cooperative compensation. And if you are, I know I mostly talk to home buyers, but really, if you are selling a home, the only thing that you should be negotiating and agreeing to is how much money your listing agent should make. And it should not be 6%. Let me just say that. Because here's the thing, like, one, if it's a $3 million home and it's 6%, like, oh, that's what service are you possibly paying that much money for? Um, but again, besides that, yes, in today's climate day and age, there still the majority of buyers are working with buyer's agents. So as a seller, you should anticipate that there's going to be a buyer's agent, and that buyer is going to want you to compensate the agent, right? Now, you don't need to set that number up front because now the onus is on the buyer to negotiate the best possible rate they can with their agent. So they might negotiate 1% with their agent. Now, you would be a fool, right, as a seller to be offering 3% compensation. You're negotiating against yourself at that point. You would be far better off to just say, hey, buyer agent compensation is TBD based upon review of offers. So write your agent's compensation into the offer. I'll take a look at it. I'm open to paying it. But because you're open to paying it, you need to account for that in whatever you agree to with your listing agent. So whether that's 2%, 3%, 4%, just know that there's a good likelihood that you'll also have compensation that you're going to need to pay to a buyer's agent in order to close the deal. That's still a far, far better way to move forward. You should not be agreeing to any sort of like 6%. I'll give half of that to the buyer's agent if there is one. And if there isn't, then I'll just keep all of it. That's just playing into realtor greed, which, it grosses me out. And you probably feel that too if you've made it this far in the video. Let me know what questions I have created. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, like, comment, share all of the things that just help get this message and education of empowering home buyers, creating a better home buying process, all of the things that I'm on a mission to do. I would just love, 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 love in like 20 years from now, if self-representation and DIY home buying is not like, oh, wow, you're doing that. Oh, what? That's weird. I would love for it to be like, oh, yeah, that's totally normal. I know a lot of people that have done DIY home buying. How cool would that be for us to be able to make that change in the industry? And again, I really do believe that an educated consumer is the best consumer, and that you have the competence. The education will give you the competence to successfully represent yourself. That's what this channel is all about. So if you like free knowledge, subscribe. See you in the next one.